9 a.m. May 22nd, 1453. The air smells of sulfur, salt, and rotting meat. A massive, 27-foot bronze cannon glows cherry red as it's packed with gunpowder. The fuse is lit. A deafening roar tears through the morning, and a 1,200-pound stone ball smashes into the ancient Theodosian walls. For 1,500 years, Rome was the invincible heartbeat of the world. It built the roads you still drive on, the laws you still follow, and the very language I am speaking right now. But today, the walls are crumbling. The last emperor has just removed his purple cloak, charging into the breach to die as a common soldier. How does an empire that conquered the known world, built cities of marble, and mastered the art of war simply vanish? From a tiny village of mud huts to a superpower of 60 million people, and finally, to a ghost of history. This wasn't just a defeat. It was the slow-motion suicide of a civilization. This is the rise and fall of Rome. 10:30 a.m. August 24th, 410 AD. The heavy, humid air hanging over the Salarian Gate is thick with the smell of wood smoke and the copper tang of blood. Inside the city walls, the silence is suddenly shattered by the rhythmic, bone-shaking thud of an axe splintering ancient cedar. The iron bolts groan, twisting under the pressure of 1,000 desperate shoulders, until finally, with a scream of rending metal, the gate bursts inward. For the first time in 800 years, the heart of the world has been breached. Thousands of Gothic warriors, their furs matted with the dust of a long march, surge into the streets of Rome. There is no grand speech, no organized defense. Only the sound of sandals scuffing on marble as senators flee into the shadows. And the distant, haunting chime of a drop gold chalice echoing through a deserted forum. The eternal city is no longer eternal. To understand how the world's greatest superpower reached this moment of absolute humiliation, we have to travel back over a millennium. To a time when Rome was nothing more than a cluster of mud huts on a swampy hillside. In the beginning, Rome was not an empire, it was a desperate experiment in survival. Surrounded by hostile tribes and the sophisticated, powerful Etruscans to the north, the early Romans were shaped by a singular, obsessive cultural trait. An absolute refusal to accept defeat. This was a society built on the twos. A cold blend of courage, duty, and ironclad discipline. By the 3rd century BC, this tenacity brought Rome into a head-on collision with the reigning titan of the Mediterranean, Carthage. This was the turning point that would define the next 600 years. The Punic Wars were not just battles, they were a total war of attrition that pushed Rome to the very edge of extinction. Imagine the sight of 37 elephants emerging from the freezing mists of the Alps. Hannibal Barca's nightmare brought to life on Italian soil. At the Battle of Cannae, Rome lost 80,000 men in a single afternoon. The ground was so slick with gore that soldiers reportedly suffocated in the mud. How does a city recover from such a catastrophic loss of life? In the halls of the Senate, the air was thick with panic, yet the Roman response was not to sue for peace, but to forbid the very word peace from being spoken. They lowered the age of military service and even armed slaves. This was the Roman way. When the world broke them, they rebuilt themselves with harder edges. They eventually took the fight to the gates of Carthage itself, erasing their rival from the map and sowing the ground with salt. With Carthage gone, the Mediterranean became Mare Nostrum. Our sea, but victory brought a new, internal poison. As gold, silk, and millions of slaves flooded into the city, the old Roman virtues began to rot from within. The gap between the ultra-wealthy elite and the starving masses became a chasm. This wasn't just an economic crisis, it was a breakdown of the social contract. Meanwhile, the Roman military was undergoing a radical, dangerous transformation. A general named Gaius Marius realized the state could no longer rely on land-owning citizens. He opened the ranks to the head count. the poorest of the poor. These men no longer looked to the Senate for their pay or their future. They looked to their generals. The legionaries' loyalty had been privatized. The soldiers were now more afraid of their commander's disapproval than they were of the law. This shift set the stage for Gaius Julius Caesar. A brilliant orator with a massive ego and mountains of debt, Caesar knew that the only way to stay ahead of his political enemies was through military glory. When the Senate ordered him to lay down his command, Caesar stood at the banks of a small, muddy stream called the Rubicon. The water was cold, the current steady. To cross with his army was high treason, a death sentence. Yet, as the metal plates of his armor clinked in the dawnlight, Caesar uttered the words that would end the Republic forever. The die is cast. He didn't just cross a river. He crossed the threshold of a new era. Rome was transitioning from a chaotic democracy into an autocracy governed by the sword. Caesar's subsequent assassination on the floor of the Senate was supposed to save the Republic, but instead, it acted as the final blow. The resulting civil wars were a meat grinder that left the Mediterranean world exhausted and broken. Out of the smoke stepped Augustus, the first man to truly rule the Roman Empire. Under his reign, Rome entered the Pax Romana. 200 years of relative peace and unprecedented prosperity. But even at the height of this golden age, a quiet, invisible decay was beginning to take hold in the foundation of the state. The borders had stopped expanding, meaning the endless supply of new slaves and looted gold had dried up. The cost of maintaining a massive standing army began to outpace the empire's taxes. The silver coins began to lose their luster as emperors mixed the precious metal with lead. A desperate move to pay the restless legions. How long could such a massive, top-heavy structure remained standing before the weight of its own grandeur caused the first cracks to appear in the marble? As the 2nd century drew to a close, a series of plagues and border skirmishes began to test the limits of Roman endurance, leaving many to wonder if this eternal city was finally running out of time. The year is 235 AD. On a windswept plain near the Rhine, the air is thick with the smell of iron and horse sweat. Maximinus Thrax, a giant of a man who rose from the rank of a common soldier to the purple robes of an emperor, stands over the bodies of his rivals. But there is no celebration. The ground beneath his boots is trembling, not from an earthquake, but from the systemic collapse of an entire world. The Roman Empire, once a monolith of stability, has just fractured into a chaotic bloodbath known as the crisis of the 3rd century. For the next 50 years, the throne will be a death sentence. 26 men will claim the title of emperor. Almost all of them will die by the blades of their own guards. This was the era of the barracks emperors. The Roman state was no longer a government of laws, but a hostage to the whims of the legions. To keep the soldiers loyal, emperors showered them with gold they didn't have. They debased the silver denarius until it was little more than scrap metal, causing prices to skyrocket by 1,000%. Imagine a world where your life savings become worthless overnight. Where the roads once patrolled by legionaries are now infested with bandits. And where the marble cities begin to pull their gates shut, retreating behind massive new defensive walls. But as Rome bled from within, the world outside was watching. To the east, the Sassanid Persians rose like a phoenix, their heavy cavalry shattering Roman lines. In 260 AD, the unthinkable happened. Emperor Valerian was captured alive by the Persians. Legend says he was used as a human footstool by the Persian king, his skin eventually stuffed with straw and displayed in a temple. The myth of Roman invincibility hadn't just been cracked. It had been pulverized, yet Rome possessed a terrifying resilience. Out of the chaos stepped Diocletian, a man who realized that the empire was simply too big for one man to rule. He did the radical. He chopped the world in half. He created the Tetrarchy, a rule of 4, splitting the administration into East and West. Then came Constantine. 312 AD, the Milvian Bridge. The night before a decisive battle for control of Rome, Constantine looked at the sky and saw a vision. A cross of light with the words, "In this sign you shall conquer." By embracing Christianity, Constantine tapped into a new moral glue for a fracturing empire. He didn't just change Rome's religion. He changed its capital. He looked east, away from the decaying grandeur of Italy, to a Greek city called Byzantium. He rebuilt it into Constantinople. The new Rome, this move was a masterstroke of geography. Constantinople was richer, more defensible, and more Christian. But as the East flourished, the original Rome, the Old West, was left to rot. It became a backwater, a symbolic husk stripped of its treasures and its political relevance. Meanwhile, deep in the Eurasian steppe, a new terror was stirring. The Huns, masters of the horse and the composite bow, moving like a storm of fire. As they pushed westward, they drove the Germanic tribes before them in a desperate, panicked migration. In 376 AD, tens of thousands of Visigoths appeared on the banks of the Danube, begging for entry into the Roman Empire as refugees. The Roman response was a cocktail of arrogance and corruption. They let the Goths in, but then starved them, reportedly trading dog meat for Gothic children to be sold into slavery. The humiliation reached a boiling point. The Goths revolted. At the Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD, the Roman army was annihilated, and Emperor Valens was killed on the field. This wasn't just a lost battle. It was the moment the barbarians realized that the Roman lion had no teeth left. 11 a.m. June 20th, 451 AD. The Catalonian plains in Gaul are a sea of trampled grass and shimmering heat. The air doesn't just smell like dust. It tastes like iron. At the center of that mass sits Attila, the scourge of God. This is not just a battle for land. It is a desperate, final stand for the very concept of the West. If the line breaks today, the Roman world doesn't just fall. It is erased. The Battle of the Catalonian Plains was the ultimate irony of the Roman story. To survive the Huns, the Romans had to rely on the barbarians they had spent centuries trying to conquer. Rome had won, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. The empire had spent its last ounce of strength, leaving it an empty suit of armor, standing only by the grace of momentum. By 476 AD, the charade reached its inevitable conclusion. The Western emperor was a teenager named Romulus Augustulus, a name that mockingly combined the founder of Rome and its first great emperor. On September 4th, a Germanic general named Odoacer walked into the palace at Ravenna. There was no epic struggle. Odoacer simply stripped the boy of his purple cloak and sent him into retirement. The imperial regalia, the crown and the robes, were packed into a crate and sent to Constantinople with a simple message. The West no longer needs an emperor of its own. With a few strokes of a pen and a quiet exile, the Roman Empire in the West ceased to exist. The lights went out across Europe. The great roads began to crack and disappear under weeds. The world became smaller, darker, and much more dangerous. But as the West fell into the era we now call the Dark Ages, Constantinople did not follow Rome into the grave. The Eastern Roman Empire flourished, acting as a shield for Europe for another 1,000 years. To the people in Constantinople, they weren't Byzantines. They were still Romans, long after the city of Rome had become a ruin-strewn cow pasture. Even in the West, Rome never truly died. It simply changed its shape. The Latin language didn't vanish. It shifted into Italian, French, and Spanish. The very concept of the West, of a unified culture based on law and citizenship, is a Roman invention. When you look at the columns on a modern courthouse, or use a calendar with months named July and August, you are walking through the ghost of the empire. The fall of Rome is history's greatest warning. It tells us that no superpower is too big to fail. That decadence is as dangerous as an invading army. And that civilization is a fragile thing that requires constant maintenance. Rome didn't fall because its enemies were invincible. It fell because it lost the will to be Rome. As you look back on this 1,000-year journey, a haunting question remains. We live in a world of global trade, massive military spending, and sprawling urban centers. A world that looks remarkably like the Roman Empire at its peak. Are we the beginning of a new Pax Romana? Or are we already standing at the Salarian Gate, listening for the sound of the axes? What do you think was the single biggest reason Rome couldn't save itself? Was it the internal corruption, or was the world simply too large for one city to hold? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.